Welcome to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put on today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and for skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out. And now, on with the show.
On behalf of the Woodstock School community, I'd like to welcome you all to our third annual TEDxWoodstock School event. The theme for this year is Rekindling Connections, something that the Woodstock School community is very well versed in. Our TEDx team has been working over the last several months with our esteemed speakers to build a very special program for you all today. And I'd like to thank our speakers who have shown such excitement and commitment to this event, and especially to our viewers who are watching online even as we speak. We hope to see you all in person here on campus next year. So for now, over to our host to start the virtual program, TEDx Woodstock School.
Welcome to something special. Welcome to TEDx. This TEDx event is a part of a global conversation that takes place every day in every corner of the world. In schools, in theaters, in workplaces, and even in prisons, people gather to hear the best ideas bubbling up in their communities. More than 3,000 TEDx events are held every year in 170 countries. It's a remarkable thing. TEDx events are self-organized under a license from TED, a non-profit organization devoted to discovering and sharing powerful ideas in the form of TED Talks. It's not TED itself, but your local TEDx team of volunteers that has done all the work to put together today's event, including booking all of the speakers. It's this team's ideas, dedication, and time that have made this possible. We really hope today's program sparks an exciting conversation. This is a day for curiosity and skepticism, for inspiration and for action. The more you enter into it, the more you will take out from it. And now, on with the show.
A warm welcome to everyone on behalf of the Woodstock School community. We're all gathered here virtually today to launch our third TEDx event at Woodstock School. The theme this year is Rekindling Connections, a phrase that challenges us to remember people, places, and moments that once meant everything to us. We hope today's event will remind us of those connections and inspire us to reach out and rekindle. We'd like to thank each of our speakers who have shown such excitement and commitment to this event, and to all our viewers who have taken the time to join us this evening. We're hoping that this will be an ongoing tradition, a meaningful ritual, which will help us in a small way to ignite inspiration and passion in young minds that many of us work for all year round. Congratulations to Team TEDx who have held fort and ensured that this event sees daylight, despite all the challenges that this pandemic year has brought to us. Now over to Ira to welcome our speakers and to begin today's event.
I would like to introduce our first speaker, an Indian writer and a graduate of the MFA program from the American University in Washington, D.C. His creative work has appeared in the Epiphany, Gargle magazine, the Literary Review, the Bombay Review, the Lantern Review, and more. His post-journalism has found its place in 52, NBA, Slam magazine, First Post, Scroll, Fountain Ink, and the Times of India. Karan is the editor and co-founder of the Indian and cultural website The Chakar. His debut novel, A Beautiful Decay, is forthcoming on the Aleph Book Company in 2022. A warm welcome to our next speaker, Karan Madhok, everyone.
Hello, my name is Karan Madhok, class of 2003, graduate of Woodstock School. I'm a journalist, a writer, and soon-to-be novelist. And my talk today is for writers and artists too. who hope to turn that powerful weapon of memory into prose or into other forms of creative output. So, Woodstock School has helped instill me with much of the creativity which I feel has been beneficial in my life as a writer. Since the theme of these TEDx sessions is rekindling connections, I found no better subject than that of memory, of nostalgia, and of those past experiences in boarding days and school days. So, here's a start that may shock some people. Some of my worst memories were in Missouri. So, not in Woodstock School itself, thankfully, which was clearly the best hour of my life. But I'm talking about my memories of school where I spent just 5 months of my life before joining Woodstock. I was 10 years old when my parents left me in a hostel in Missouri. My parents are from Varanasi, which was about a 16-hour train journey back in those days. I was only in grade 5. I'd never been away from home before this. I don't need to say anymore, do I? If you've had boarding school experience, especially like I did at such a young age, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. From the first time I waved goodbye to my mother outside the doors of our hostel hall, I was in a living nightmare. I cried almost every night for the first few weeks. Even my letters were stained with tears. Yes, those were the days of actual letter writing, actual pen on actual paper in actual envelopes that featured the saliva of my actually licked stamps. That's how old I am. I have a lot of memories from those next few months. Some are mundane, like the Sunday mornings when we all gathered for the only TV time of the week and we would watch reruns of the Mahabharata on Doordarshan. There are memories of how the wardens would slap my palms with a wooden ruler before school in the morning. If I didn't have my nails neatly clipped or my hair neatly combed. There are some memories which are life defining, even life changing, like the time I ran away from the school for about half a day, or the time my elder brother rescued another schoolmate from drowning during a winter trip to Goa. Now, of course, we all know the memory can be a funny thing. I would say this is a shared phenomena between most of us. We are often likely to remember specifics of events from our childhood, even more than similar specifics from a month ago. In some cases, adults, I think, face a sort of disassociation where we may block out childhood memories because of trauma. But in many other cases, looking back at our formative years, these childhood years, we remember everything as being new and exciting. Everything was being done for the very first time. Every experience felt like it would change us forever. And often it did. Many of us, for example, remember the birthday parties of our childhood cousins and friends, decades after they happened. We remember the address, we remember what the home looked like, the outfits, the return gifts we got at these parties, stuff like that. Um, in my experience, some of the best storytelling, whether it's oral storytelling, written or told in a multimedia kind of format, they all hark back to these memories of childhood. For so many writers and creative people, the ability to harness that purity or innocence of those early experiences goes a long way in defining the work we eventually produce as adults. Sometimes these stories are factual, as nonfiction. So, as in, the storyteller will tell the audience that whatever happened happened to them, that the storyteller themselves were witness to this highly vivid scene from the past. Perhaps they either actively participated or were just alive for this occasion. You could recall perhaps being a witness to something celebratory, like the time a big movie star or athlete visited your school. Or perhaps it could be something traumatic, like witnessing a devastating earthquake or a fire. The occasion could be momentous. I still remember being on the train, on an overnight train. I think we are going either from Varanasi to Dehradun or the other way back. And early in the morning, from off the platform, my father picked up the newspaper. This was in the early 90s, and the headline was about the assassination of Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi. So, occasions like that really, really stick with your mind. It could be a tiny occasion, or one of the occasions, one of the memories that sticks with me from Woodstock days is a specific taste. It's a taste of the masala resin that collects at the bottom of a raw YY packet that you're sharing with your friends. That's a specific memory. But these memories could also be repackaged and retold as a form of fiction. This is really common with novelists or filmmakers, especially those who produce work that features coming of age stories. There are so many examples like these in pop culture, including novels like Catcher in the Rye or comedy Hollywood films like Superbad or Booksmart. The audience knows that these stories are fiction, but there are certain specifics in the story that makes it clear that the storyteller has actually lived in the place described, that they have had the type of friends that we see on the screen, that they felt those very particular emotions themselves. So remember that example I gave of that famous athlete maybe visiting your school? You could always repackage that as a form of fiction. when you actually get a chance to interact with this athlete and they turn out heartbreakingly to be drastically different from what you expected them to be. What's beautiful about fiction is that we're able to find a type of universality in something specific. For me, it is finding that specificity that is the not so secret weapon, which can turn a decent story into a really memorable one. Take, for example, the emotion of apathy. It's one thing to say that a character was so apathetic and cold hearted that he didn't even feel sorrow for the death of his mother. Okay, that's a pretty strong statement, and it will perhaps shock the reader. But what if you actually wrote about all the other things that the character did apart from grieving for his mother? So, this is basically the opening of one of my favorite novels, Albert Camus' L'Étranger, or The Outsider. In this novel, the main character, Marceau, doesn't remember if his mother died today or yesterday. Marceau finds himself sleeping lethargically on the bus back to his hometown for his own mother's funeral. He focuses more on how talkative the caretaker that he meets here is. And when he returns home the next day, he simply goes for a pleasurable swim. The specifics of what he actually did is one of the well known aphorisms of fiction and creative nonfiction, which is that the author must show and not tell, put scene instead of exposition. Where instead of being told that Marceau was heartless about his mother's death, we're actually told about all the things that he does instead. And this heartlessness is something that we, the readers, can then decide for ourselves. This principle applies to memory in a very powerful way. I could just tell you guys directly how much I hated that Missouri boarding school before I joined Woodstock. I could say, just say it out loud how homesick I was. But how boring is that story? What type of weirdo isn't a little homesick during their first time at a boarding school, right? But what would make my story unique is the specific homesickness that is unique to me. So I already told you about the letters that were stained with my tears. I had other complaints too, like not being allowed to choose my own clothes to wear after school every evening. And so I would miss how my mother then involved me in, picking my clothes, picking my outfit. At this school, I remember waiting outside the phone booth for my parents to call once a week. But instead of the small talk that they would initiate, I would simply break down crying into the phone, and then neither of us could hear each other. These specifics eventually ended up playing a major part in my creative work. In a nonfiction essay I published last year, I recall the day that I escaped from this school and tried to go all the way home from Missouri to Varanasi all alone. So remember, I was just 10 years old. Okay, so that's a pretty interesting premise, isn't it? But what makes the story truly stand out is, again, the specifics of memory that I added. I remember that I had exactly 20 rupees in my pocket to take me somehow 1100 kilometers south of the country. I remember the multicolored shirt I wore, bought from the Tibetan market near the Julagar. I remember that after scaling the school's walls and making my way all the way down to Library Bazaar, I finally found some sense and decided to walk back to the dorms. But I do remember exactly I spent that 20 rupees on. A packet of Lay's chips and 10 Hajmola candies, most of which were imli flavored. And yes, when I returned back to school that evening, I remembered how many lashes the teacher gave me on my butt. 10, same as my age. My memories of the school that shall not be named later helped me write fiction too. One such example was a short story that was published in an American journal a few years ago about friendships among young adolescents in boarding school. And even though you might have stories that don't fit the exact setting of boarding school, there have been times that in my work I borrowed the specificity of emotions from those days and placed them into entirely different situations. After all, homesickness isn't just a boarding school problem. Adults can be homesick when they migrate or live in or work in different cities. And you don't need to be a 10-year-old in a hostel to feel that detachment from one's parents, whether that detachment is physical or it could be an emotional detachment too. For writers, one of the best weapons in our arsenal is our memory, and especially memories of those energetic days of childhood. Often, the strongest essays can be the ones that are able to find a perfect blend of the scene of childhood with a reflection of present day. So, a great example of this is an essay written by the Delhi based academic Paromita Patranovish last year. Paromita wrote about a time over 2 decades ago from the 90s when she was a 13-year-old and she spent a night stargazing on the rooftop of her family home in Durgapur in West Bengal. She had a mesmerizing experience watching a meteor shower, and she had these minute descriptions of this event that really added color to her essay. But what made her piece truly special was that when she wrote this essay 20 years later, she added reflections and retrospections from her perspective as an adult. So this essay had two I characters: the 13-year-old Paramita who saw the meteor shower, and then the adult Paramita who saw her former self seeing the meteor shower. Now, this adult could then include decades of experience to explain to us how that night changed her life, how she understands herself now as a tiny being in the vastness of space and the universe. This is the power that the best kind of essays about memory. The ability to be two people at once, to show who you once were and show how you look back at that, your former self. Sometimes you may dislike your former self. I've written essays about school days when, I took part in bullying and teasing my own classmates. But you have to expose that self of yours, warts and all, no matter how imperfect it may be. Sometimes your younger self may teach you bigger things. Of course, there's no bigger influence on one's childhood memories than that of one's parents. These memories are so formative to the personality of every person, and often thinking about them as a writer in retrospect will make you re examine these relationships. It could be a moment when your parents embarrassed you by maybe revealing a closely guarded secret in the face of their friends, or it could be a moment when your parents went the extra mile for you, even if they were thousands of miles away from you in boarding school. How did your I character react to the past in these moments? And how does the present day I character now think about the past? As a writer, your pen or your keyboard are your tools of excavation, and you have to dig that tool deep within yourself and find the memory that speaks strongest and most vividly to you, even if that memory makes you uncomfortable. The same has to be done if you're repackaging the memory as fiction. Good or bad, you have to tackle it. You have to find the specifics. You have to make it live and shine bright. No great prose is written without just a tiny amount of unpleasantness. You know what's the most wonderful part about this excavation into one's own past? It's the fact that writing about memory can serve as a form of therapy. So whether it's trauma or some form of unfulfilled expectation, a relationship that was left without coming full circle, or an event that you haven't really fully digested or come to terms with yet, writers can have this sort of superpower, I feel, of detaching from their own self and of studying themselves from a distance, while also having access to one's own nostalgia and one's own memories and experiences. Whether or not you eventually create great prose from your memory is almost irrelevant in the end. I feel that what you'll end up doing is getting a better understanding of the memory itself, and then hopefully a better understanding of self. I want to thank Woodstock School for giving me a chance to share my thoughts with you in this TEDx talk. I hope it has been helpful, and I hope that excavating your memories of Woodstock or boarding school days or any memory of childhood, I hope it helps to urge a creative spring, whether you're a writer, an artist, a musician, or just someone hoping to reconnect with your younger self. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your time and thank you for that wonderful talk. Our next speaker is one of our very own students. Aditi Gaur is a grade 10 student at Woodstock. As the founder and editor-in-chief of Hubble e-magazine, she aims to simplify concepts in the fields of STEM and make them accessible to a larger audience. As a STEM enthusiast, she hopes to pursue energy engineering to hopefully one day play a pivotal role in the world's fight for clean energy. She envisions Hubble as a platform to raise awareness regarding the world's most pressing issues, while she grapples with STEM to solve them. We can't wait to hear this next talk. Over to you, Aditi.
When I was 4 years old, my family took me on a vacation to Dharamshala. The rolling green hills, the lush vegetation, and the palpable scent of clean air. I was in love. So much so that even when my mother kept nagging me for a picture, I didn't budge. From then and now, these green mountainous places feel unreal to me, and whenever I'm in them, I surrender. It's all a matter of perspective, really. I live in Delhi, our beautiful, bustling, polluted capital. Clean air feels like a privilege to me. No wonder being around nature blew my mind. Well, my mom eventually did get me to pose. Fast forward 2 years later, when everyone around me was talking about climate change and this impending doom we're headed towards. I wasn't stoked. My happy place could be taken from me at any moment. Now that more time has passed, this is no longer this distance problem that is the next generation's issue. This is it. This is our global crisis, and it's already impacted every region in the world, virtually deteriorating every aspect of our lives. Every day, climate scientists fight for their life explaining the severity of climate change. All the signs are right there in front of us, and yet we refuse to heed to them. Climate change deniers have some very funny arguments, such as, the Earth's climate has always changed, and my favorite, just trust me. But credit where credit is due, there is something these deniers get right. The Earth's climate has indeed always changed. Climate change is defined as long-term shifts in temperature and weather patterns, and it's a natural phenomenon. In fact, if you look at the Earth's geological records, you'll see an ice age occur about every 100,000 years. However, what they get wrong about this is the timing. Since the last ice age, the Earth has warmed somewhere between 4 to 7 degrees, and this change took place over 5,000 years. However, the rate at which we're warming the Earth right now is 10 times the natural rate. And the cherry on top is, if we continue down this path, the next century will see this change 20 times faster. But why is this a problem? The planet is hotter. We made ACs for a reason. Remember that time when Instagram was flooded with posts about the California wildfires? Hashtag thoughts and prayers. Well, what you might have missed during that time was the fact that the number of wildfires has tripled in recent years due to us putting more and more greenhouse gases into the environment. This happens because these warmer temperatures make the soil and vegetation drier in these areas, making them more flammable. It's not just wildfires. Natural disasters of all kinds have gotten worse due to climate change, such as droughts, floods, and typhoons. Species globally are evolving to adapt to climate change. Scientists are already noticing changes in their genetics, morphology, and interactions with the environment. For example, salamanders in North America are shrinking in size to better suit the warmer temperatures. Tiny salamanders. That's a cute image, right? Except not really. Imagine entire species altering in ways we cannot predict, just unabated changes to ecosystems that will eventually result in their collapse. And this is not some danger theory I'm out here spewing, this is our reality. The kelp forests of South America have already collapsed, and they're not replenishing because the adapted species favor warmer weathers. But how do we get from small salamanders to a full-blown global collapse? If human-caused climate change keeps changing the process of evolution, then we'll have disruptions in resources that we're heavily reliant on. Crops, livestock, fisheries, these are all systems that run on the ecological principles of the natural world, and they're changing because of us. As we keep adding more and more emissions into the environment, our future keeps getting hazier. But why is this happening? When we think about the causes of climate change, we generally tend to pin it on advancements in technology, which is true for the most part. If you look at advancements in agriculture and technology, that led to the Industrial Revolution, which we all know wasn't good news for the environment. Then, if you look at advancements in transportation, that led to emissions caused by planes, automobiles, etc. I mean, who would have thought that coal-run trains would absolutely destroy the environment? But just because the technology is the enemy, I don't think that means that it can't be the savior. In order to avoid the most disastrous effects of climate change, we need to reach net zero emissions by the year of 2050, and 132 countries have already pledged to do so. Every waking and sleeping moment, we contribute to these emissions. For example, a simple Google search results in 0.2 grams of carbon straight into the environment. So think about that the next time you Google the worst dressed Met Gala celebrities for the 10th time. So we need to cut emissions, but we also need to keep in mind that our energy demands are only going to keep increasing. The world population is expected to cross 11 billion by the year of 2100. When you look at this mammoth task, it's very natural to detach, to lose hope and not care. I mean, that's my reflex every time I look at my math syllabus. But here's why I think we can do it. Because humans are straight up geniuses, even if our Met Gala outfits are questionable at best. We have this ability to resist, this ability to invent that sets us apart. What we need are technological breakthroughs and advancements in clean tech. Not the end of technology, but a new beginning. Clean tech refers to technologies that help towards offsetting negative impacts towards the environment. This can be through increasing energy efficiency, using more sustainable resources, or environmental protection activities. These clean tech technologies and breakthroughs will be required in 5 main sectors: manufacturing, electricity, transportation, agriculture, and buildings. These 5 sectors collectively account for almost all emissions caused by humans. And these technologies need to be scalable to fight an uphill battle. Looking at manufacturing, it's the single largest contributor to these emissions, accounting for a little over 30%. The production of 1 ton of cement causes around 0.7 tons of carbon emissions. In the year of 2020, 4.1 billion tons of cement were produced. If you look at the global population and do the math, this means 300 kgs of carbon were released per person for the production of cement alone. What we need to do is find more efficient ways to make the products we already know and love. And people are already doing this. A New York-based jewelry firm has found a way to make carbon-negative diamonds by taking emissions from the environment and converting them into these gems. On the other hand, traditional methods of diamond mining cause irreversible harm to the environment, impacting wildlife, soil quality, air quality, etc. Not only that, but exploration for these diamonds is usually done through electricity and hydrocarbons, which also causes more emissions. Realistically, it's impossible to create carbon neutral or negative waste for all the products you manufacture. But we don't have to. This is where carbon capture technologies come into play. What these technologies do, essentially, is capture carbon from the environment and, in essence, lock it away. It's similar to what trees do. Unfortunately, as great as trees are, we simply don't have enough land on the planet to plant enough trees to offset all our emissions. So what we need are basically more space-efficient trees, such as direct air capture. Direct air capture is a technology that directly takes the carbon from the environment and stores it deep inside the earth. However, this technology is very expensive right now, which means that we need to innovate more in this sector. After manufacturing, the next largest contributor to our emissions is electricity. This is the sector we're innovating very actively in. In the past 15 years, costs for solar and wind energy have been down 87% and 44% respectively. This is very impressive. Nuclear power has also been on the rise, and the push for clean energy is now more than ever. However, we still need to invent more. As the global population continues to increase, so will energy demands. That means we need to innovate better ways to generate and store low-carbon electricity while already employing the resources we do have, such as renewable sources of energy and nuclear power. The third largest contributor to emissions is agriculture. Meat and dairy farms all across the world produce a lot of methane. This basically means that cows need to get their guts checked. The production of 1 kg of beef results in almost 100 kgs of carbon emissions into the environment. Keeping in mind that our need for food is only going to keep increasing, lower consumption along with sustainable production techniques are very important in reaching net zero. The fourth largest contributor to emissions is transportation. This accounts for approximately 16% of all emissions. Over 90% of the fuel used in transportation in the US is petroleum-based, primarily gasoline and diesel. Now, even though electric vehicles are on the rise, we need to shift to cars that run on clearer and lower carbon methods now. And all this time, we also need to look for fuels that can power bigger vehicles such as planes. An example of this is hydrogen fuel. This is the fuel which only byproduct is water. And companies and countries all around the world are heavily investing in it, especially the European Union. Lastly, we have buildings. This is the fifth contributor to emissions, and it accounts for roughly 7%. Buildings contribute to emissions in 2 ways. One is through the production of materials that are required to build them, such as cement, steel, iron, etc. And second is when we live in them. For example, when we use heating and air conditioning for our homes and offices. Estimates suggest that the number of buildings in the world will double by 2060. Which means we need better and more sustainable practices. An example of this is low-E windows. These windows make sure that the ultraviolet rays from the outside don't enter inside, and when they do, this heat is retained. This in turn decreases the energy demands for each building. Climate change is the biggest challenge we have ever faced as a species. except maybe getting out of bed before 10 a.m. It requires the biggest push in innovation ever. Together, if we let our ability to invent with science and technology lead the way, there is hope in the future. This is not a moonshot, this is bigger than that. How we invent in the upcoming years will quite literally define the existence of our humankind, whether we survive or we perish. Look around us, we have built absolutely crazy things, and we have so much brilliance amongst all of us. Bill Gates said that it's our ability to invent that makes him hopeful about the future. I agree. Some of us are going to quite literally save the world. We'll have our own group of little nerdy Avengers. And if it's not going to be you, then who will it be? You don't want to do it out of the goodness of your heart? Don't. I'm not asking you to. Do it for that young girl who might lose her happy place forever.
Truly inspiring, Aditi. Thank you for sharing what Rekindling Connections is all about.
A very good evening, everybody. My name is Astha Bhakri and I am the staff advisor to the TEDx team Woodstock School. I am here today to introduce a very special performance. A performance by our very own Miss Kushmita. Kushmita is the head of strings, violin and orchestra at Woodstock School. She's a highly accomplished musician and has completed a diploma and master's degree in music from the prestigious University of Music and Theatre Munich and the University of Hamburg in Germany. Let's take the time and welcome Kushmita. Let's welcome our next speaker, Shivangi Chaturvedi from the class of 2001. Shivangi is the head of development at the Childhood Dementia Initiative, a world-first non-profit started during the pandemic to address the lack of awareness, treatments and appropriate care for children with dementia globally. Over the last decade, Shivangi has worked with philanthropists across Australia and the UK to drive innovative and effective responses to pediatric diseases, inequity in education and youth unemployment. Prior to Philanthropy, Shivangi started her career in media, working at CNN and Sony Music. She has lived, studied and worked in 5 continents and is particularly passionate about diversity in representation across all walks of life.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak with you today. My name is Shivangi, and I would like to take you back with me into the early days of May 2021. It was the first 3 days of May 2021, not that long ago. Unfortunately, some of the worst days of my life. And I'll explain why. You see, both my parents were suffering seriously with COVID, the Delta variant. They were in a house that wasn't theirs, alone. They were in a city that they were visiting due to extenuating circumstances. They were in a country that they absolutely love, but hadn't been their home for decades, away from their adult children who would do anything to care for them, who were completely on 2 different continents on the other side of the world. So you see, my family at this time was in crisis. And during those 3 days, there was one question that just kept going over and over and over in my brain. And that question is, whom do I know? You see, we needed help. And so we needed to figure out quickly who would be able to care for my parents, even though there was the threat of COVID. They needed help. Who did we know that could arrange for oxygen in a city, Delhi, that seemed to be running out of it rapidly? Who did we know that could arrange for plasma or medicines, or even a doctor that we could reach out to ask for guidance? What should we be looking out for? How could we safeguard my parents during this time? Who did we know that could arrange for a hospital bed where it didn't matter how much money we seemed to be throwing at this problem, there didn't seem to be a decent hospital bed at a decent hospital anywhere in Delhi? Who did we know that could help me petition the Australian government in order to travel to India, because at that time the Australian borders were shut, both in and out of the country. In fact, if you were coming from India, there was the threat of really large fines as well as jail time. Who did we know that could help my brother get an emergency visa so that he could come from where he was coming from in order to travel and be with my parents during this time? So we were reaching out to any connection. We were racking our brains, reaching out to any connection that we had. And you can ask the question, you must be asking the question, did it work? Well, the answer is yes and no. My parents were never alone. You see, I had these beautiful cousins who literally risked their own health and their lives to take care of my parents as if they were their own, never leaving their side. And we had an army of people. I mean, it was people across 5 continents who were supporting in some way or the other, reaching out to people that they knew, connecting with old colleagues. I mean, literally just checking in on us, just doing anything they could to support. We had... my parents never went without oxygen. They were some of the lucky ones. They never went without oxygen. They never went without medicines or plasma. Eventually, they did get those hospital beds at a very good hospital in Delhi. And my brother did make it over there. He was there for a night, about 15 hours before my father died. And he was with him that entire time. And minutes before my dad died, my brother held the phone to his ear so that I could speak to him, so he could hear my voice. And when my brother cremated my father and did the last rites, he was not alone. And for that we were really grateful. And my mother, she recovered. She's doing really well, actually, and recently was in Australia. She was with my family. She met she was spent some time with my little ones, my littlest one, whom she met for the first time, a child that my father never got to meet in person. So why do I share this really difficult period with you? This story that every time I talk about it, it makes me cry. And I think the reason is because during this period of crisis, I learned a lot. The first thing that really struck me was the way people stepped up to support us. I mean, it was a thing to behold. How people reached out to other people, paid for oxygen from different countries, connected with others. We had someone connecting with an ex-colleague's junior staff member. I mean, it was extraordinary just how many people got involved and tried to do something to help. And I think it's because until this time, I have always thought of my friends and my colleagues as sort of companions in life. We're all just trying to have the human experience together. But during this time, the weight of these connections became crystal clear. And I try and think as to what was that quality that really spurred people on, sort of galvanized them into action. And the thing that rises above the rest is this quality of vulnerability. You see, I grew up in a family, and I guess I'm from a culture where we don't really talk a lot about the difficulties in our lives. We don't open up and share them with others, believing, I suspect, that to protect ourselves, we don't do that. And I was taught to be really independent in this challenging world, find the strength within. So having to ask for help was not something that I did very easily. I find asking for help really, really hard. And at this point, I didn't just have to ask for help. I had to beg for it. There was a vulnerability that was asked of us that really shocked me. I had to send my parents' medical details on text messages to people that I hadn't really been in touch with for a very long time, and they were forwarding it on. It was extraordinary how open we had to be about the experience that we were going through. And the truth is, if we weren't that open, we wouldn't have gotten the appropriate help that we needed. And the other quality that really was something that I saw very clearly, and on reflection I see it even more, is the quality of authenticity in the relationships that my parents had had. My parents, it comes to mind because there were so many of their friends who were trying to support us. People who had held me as a baby were, stepping up to do something. And these relationships had been built over periods of times, and there was such goodwill in them. It was something, truthfully, I'm so proud of my family for that. But when I look at these qualities of vulnerability and authenticity, I've seen them over and over and over again, not in myself, no, but I have been working in the nonprofit space for over a decade now. And most recently, I've been working with children that have dementia. And the number one response I get when we talk about children that have dementia is, we didn't know that children and young people could have dementia. Well, childhood dementia is very much a thing. There are about 700,000 children and young people that are currently living and suffering with dementia. And what that means is that these children and young people have a genetic disorder. That means they will lose their cognitive abilities, their physical abilities. they will regress slowly, sometimes over months, sometimes over years, sometimes over decades, until they die. Most children, young people with dementia don't expect to live past the age of 18. Some of those children will die in their infancy. And what I see with these families is that entire period, whether it's the decades or whether it's the months, that entire period is crisis. Now, I can't really speak, and I'm really reticent not to speak on behalf of families whose children have dementia, because truthfully, until it's your child or a child that you deeply love, you don't know what it is. You don't know what the experience is. But from an outsider's perspective, the only reason I can talk about the crises is because I see the fight. I see the fight that these families have to go through. I mean, they have to fight for diagnosis. Most people don't know childhood dementia is a thing, and so often the diagnosis is delayed. They have to fight for information. They reach out to families on the other side of the world in order to get appropriate information for their child. They have to fight in order to get onto medical trials. I mean, frankly, there's few, if any, therapies for childhood dementia. And so these children and young people are often fighting to get on some sort of medical trial that could possibly help them. These families are fighting in order to get appropriate support. I mean, even in countries like Australia, there are no systems that have been created with childhood dementia in mind. And so the care of these children, it's very often inequitable and inappropriate. And during this fight, you see these families and these children, they have to display, they're forced into a great amount of vulnerability. It's not by choice, it's just because they have to. They have to tell people over and over again what their experience is of childhood dementia. They have to explain to healthcare providers the daily experience that their child has and how their family home is set up. You know, if a family has to ask for help for financial support, for example, they have to explain the high care needs of their child is the reason why they have to stop work, but also why they have increased expenses, and therefore they're asking for help. And sometimes the vulnerability is forced upon them, as I've just described, but then there's that next layer of vulnerability that you also see, and that's when families, they're trying to make changes, not just for themselves and their child, but for other children who are experiencing what their child is going through, or other families that are experiencing what they are. So this is when I see families, share their personal stories, sometimes of bereavement and what their experience was like when their child was alive, to try and explain to governments that they need to be investing in research and in the care of these children. Or I'll give you an example. I've seen a mother share the before experience of her daughter when she wasn't diagnosed and was fully healthy, to the after. She shared videos of how the speech had regressed and how her physical abilities had completely changed, in order for a philanthropist to simply understand, simply conceive of the experience that she is going through, watching her child suffer and die in front of her. And in this vulnerability, these families are trying to change the world for children with dementia. And in this vulnerability, I see great courage. Mind-blowing courage. Now, what I'm sharing with you is not new. We all know that vulnerability is a key quality of courage. We all know that connections really can change and impact our lives. But when I was asked to give this talk, and when I was told it was about rekindling connections, it took me about 5 seconds to think about what I wanted to speak about today. And I'll explain why. In my time of crisis, in my family's time of crisis, I was blown away by all these people, these connections. And when I mapped them out and tried to define who they were to me, I understood something that I'd never understood before. Is that these connections, these people, they make up my village. You see, I am a person who's lived in 5 different continents. I've been called a global nomad. Or when I was in high school, people referred to me as a third culture kid. And when you are like that, you don't think of yourself as coming or belonging to a village, because you're never really there for a long enough period of time. And in my mind, a village was somewhere, in the old days, it was made up of hunters and gatherers, and they came together and they survived together. And that's what I realized was happening here, is these people were coming together to help us survive, literally a matter of life and death. And then it occurred to me that my village was so much more than what I had ever conceived of a village being. My village now, because of technology, exists because of WhatsApp messages sent in groups to groups of people. My village consists of DMs sent on Instagram because I saw beautiful photographs of someone's graduation or wedding or sadly of a difficult time in their life. My village consists of Zoom birthday calls where people get on from around the world just to wish someone in a time of pandemic and then we couldn't travel. My village consists of friends that I haven't spoken to since high school, or colleagues of colleagues that I remember going out to karaoke with. And this village, it has real power. Those relationships, the authenticity of those relationships, the depth of those relationships. What I understood in my crisis is that it has real power. So today I'd like to ask you to define your village. I understood what mine was only because I was living in crisis. Imagine what yours could be if you understand what it is from now. Think about your part in your village, because we all have a part to play in our village. We can help it thrive. When we grow, our village grows with us. And I'd like you to think about the reality that crisis is coming. We're living through a pandemic, a global pandemic. In Australia, we've just been through fires. Now we've been through floods. We've all been talking about recently how we're on the precipice of a third world war. And sometimes it's not even all of that. It's just the individual crisis in each family that we face. And when you are called to courage, when your crisis comes, it'll be the quality of the authenticity that you have displayed in your relationships, the depth of those relationships, the strength of your village that carries you through.
Thank you, Shivangi, for ideas truly worth spreading. I am pleased to introduce our next speaker, a senior here at Woodstock. Tawishi is a grade 12 student at Woodstock School and is from Jammu and Kashmir. She loves to play basketball, sing, and plays the harmonium. Through her TEDx talk, she wants to share a story of how she was able to reconnect with her roots despite having nothing in common, due to societal disconnect from Jammu and Kashmir. Her aim is to make the audience believe that each of us have the power to make connections with people despite having differences and uncommon grounds. Please join me in welcoming Tawishi Dogra, everyone. Hello everyone, today I'm here to share my story. Life in Jammu and Kashmir is not easy when there are constant threats, blackouts, protests, and that's why my parents early on decided that they would ensure that I attain the best possible education. So they sent me to an international boarding school when I was 8 years old. I was startled to see the freedoms that some of my peers were experiencing at this young juncture of life. And every day in Woodstock felt like a new experience, and that is why I soon forgot about the plight of my people back home. Whenever I watched the news, it never felt the same. It looked like I was simply looking above the hardships of my people because I stopped feeling that emotional connection and bond with the people in my community. I thought I was different because I lived differently. I thought I was different because I lived far away. But was I really different? Anyways, that's a question to answer in the end. But to lighten the mood, let me introduce myself. My name is Tawishi. I'm from Jammu and Kashmir, India, and I studied in an international boarding school. My roommate is Canadian, my classmates are from all over the world, and I consider myself a modern age hipster trying to find my identity in between all of this. So who am I, you must be wondering? Well, I'm a Kashmiri girl from the Dogra community who studies in an international school and has a global vision because of the people around me. And I am who I am today because of the people in my community. I would like to say I'm none of the above, yet I'm a mix of it all. I am an introverted person who once hated the process of getting to know new people, but I loved it when I was able to connect with these people with these diverse ideas and thoughts. It's ironic, right? Because I hate the process, but I love the outcome. So I never did. I mean, if I didn't, why would I be here in front of all of you today? I started a women's self-help group during the pandemic through a virtual fundraiser, and that was only possible because I connected with a lot of people with diverse ideas. But initially it was a very traumatizing experience because you never know with people you see. They could either like you or they could not. But this process became easier. And how did that happen? It happened because I stopped believing I was different. And that is the reason I was able to connect with these people. Let me explain. Oftentimes we get so indulged in observing our differences that we forget that our roots are the same. My task was to get underprivileged women to work with me. Simple, right? And I know what it sounds like. I promise I'm not a capitalist. But it was so difficult because I believed I was different. And this was the reason why I felt detached, why we all feel detached. Detached from our true emotions, detached from the life that was once so precious, and most importantly, detached from the people that once mattered. We worry for what we will be like when we go back. Will I simply be an outsider? Will they even accept me? And we wonder, why did I put my legs in two boats? Should I have just picked one? But we can never pick one because we can never let go. I could never let go. So how do we not let go and feel connected? We do that by moving forward despite our differences. Because it's not the difference between us and the people who we are trying to connect with which is drifting us apart, but rather the feeling of feeling different. So stop feeling different. But how do we feel the same as the people who have different values, cultures, traditions, languages? Stop asking yourself that question, but rather ask yourself, what are the ways in which we are connected? And this is what I call the intersection. It's that one common point which connects us with all these people who we want to connect with. But once you find that intersection, stop and listen. A year ago, I went to this meditation camp where we had to introduce ourselves and say, I am yours. Well, I still don't know what I am yours means because I left the camp, but I was the first one to finish. And a few weeks pass and I see this girl from across the street who yells my name and says, Hey Tawishi. I'm so startled because I literally know no one in my hometown. But she's approaching fast and I am thinking fast. And now we are face to face and she introduces herself. I somewhat try to place her in my memories, and this is when it hits me. Oh right, she was the girl from a few weeks ago who finished last that day. She introduces herself and I pretend like I know her already, trying to continue the conversation. But thinking back at it now, wow, I feel so important because she remembered me from that one day where we had to interact with like 50 people. And because of this, she becomes instantly more likable and we are still friends till today. Is this because she remembered my name? Not really, but yes at the same time. She remembered the littlest details about something I said and took the initiative. Initiative is a thing we should focus on. So now let's think about it. The simplest way to connect is to listen. When we listen to something someone said and use that to connect with them, the person we are trying to connect with feels like we care. When if you can make someone believe that you care about them, you form a bond. And when there's a bond, there's a connect. And this is exactly what I did to connect with rural women in my community. Listening became a strength I leveraged, and I used the power of listening as a tool to build deeper connections with the women in my community. I thought if I could speak the same language as the people in my community, I would be able to form a deeper connection with them, and this would be my point of intersection. And for the first time, this is when I reached out to someone to help me, my house helper. And even though she wasn't convinced initially, I was able to convince her to help me out. I mean, I pestered her into doing it anyways. But as time passed on, we continued speaking Dogri, and every day we would start off the day with a new conversation in Dogri. She would tell me about the people in my community. She would tell me about the favorite songs of the women. She would tell me about their daughters. She would tell me about how we could all work together to form a team. And soon I started to understand and speak the language fluently. At least that's what I thought. And after a few weeks, I'm confident and ready to conquer the world. And my house helper finally arranged a meeting for me to talk with 5 women in my community. We all sat in a circle. I had arranged snacks and drinks for them, and I started talking in Dogri. But the second it started, I thought it all fell apart. The feeling of it being over before it even began. I was saying everything and anything, and nothing made sense. Everyone was giggling while I was tearing up. Was my idea stupid? Did I not make any sense? And by the end of it, it felt as if no one was really taking me seriously. As I finished my speech, they all started clapping. All humiliated, I looked at my Didi as she came running and gave me a big pat on the back and hugged me. All confused, I asked her if they were collectively trolling me, but her response really startled me. She said no one had ever really treated them with so much respect. No one had ever really come to them and talked to them in a way which I was doing today, and no one had ever truly listened to them. My Didi had told them how much effort I had put in that day to meet all of them, and they already had a glimpse of the ideas. So even if they comprehended only half the things I said, or even less than half, I had done my job. I now had 5 women who believed in me. I understood that singing Dogri songs with them, dancing with them, talking to them in our own language was our point of intersection. Why would anyone believe a 16-year-old girl who promises to give them jobs? But they did. They believed in me. And in order to make those 2 lines intersecting become parallel and eventually connect, I had to put in consistent effort. Consistent effort in not just listening, but taking initiative. And this is because despite our so-believed differences, language, religion, faith, culture, we were able to connect for a common cause because of this common point we had. And eventually we were able to become a family. Despite all your differences with whosoever you want to create a deeper connection with, find that intersection and utilize it to create deeper connections with people in your community. When you're able to connect with one individual, use that to create a chain of relations. And because now it's not just you connecting with the world, but it's the world connecting right back at you. And this is exactly what happened as my plan materialized and as I moved forward. People started reaching out to me, and the reason this was able to happen was because we had mutual connections and we had that point of intersection, that point of ideas which were mutual. No matter how hard I tried not to care or how much I acted like it didn't really matter, at the end of the day I failed to recognize that it always did. You know, there's always this transparent string that pulls you right back to where you started. But it's not the place where it pulls you back to, rather the people and your interactions with the community. And that's why it's so hard to let go, because it shaped us into who we are today. So we can never really say we lost touch with our roots, because if we truly did, the thought of our roots would never even cross our minds in the first place. We may not realize it, but when the time comes, we do. Because I did too. Having lived half my life in Woodstock, I was convinced I was different from the people in my community. However, wearing my Woodstock shoe in one foot and my Kashmiri shoe on the other made me realize how important it is not to let go. Because during the pandemic, I was able to understand the importance of rekindling connections and how it's not just about reconnecting, because we never truly disconnect. However, when we try to rekindle connections, it's a path which feels so alien yet familiar, a process which feels so warm but lonely sometimes. But in the end, it's worth it because we rediscover ourselves again. No matter how far we run away or how much we act like it doesn't matter, if it once truly mattered to us, we can never completely forget it. With my experiences during the pandemic, I learned this and I became someone with so much compassion and love towards humankind because I understood the importance of looking beyond differences and connecting with people. If everyone moves forward with such a mentality, we will be able to create unbreakable bonds in our community. And this is why I'm glad to say I put my legs in both boats.
Thank you, Tawishi, for teaching us about the importance of our roots and the intersection that can connect us and bring us back together. Before we call upon our next speaker, we have a special performance lined up today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our favorite Mark Monteiro from grade 11.
I've been thinking about it all night. Thinking about my memories. Gotta leave it all behind. Yeah, it's time it all released. I packed 2-3 packs of coke. It's more than I need, I know. May just drink it on the first day. I think that I'ma be alright. Seeing your face every night, making those jokes about your height. I know it's gonna be a while. My way, I'm so happy I can finally do it my way. Get the key so we can get on the highway. Not to worry cause I know that we'll be okay. Late nights, I'm trying not to be wild. Don't know what I'm feeling but it feels right. Don't know what I'm doing but I'll be alright. I'll be alright, I'll be alright. I'll be alright, I'll be alright. And I've been thinking about it all day. Playing out my fantasies. But you never ever know what I type out of my phone cause we're not ready. Bring it back, pull you out of the water. Give me the code to crack cause when I try you won't bother. But we're getting to the enemies. Maybe this is where I'm meant to be. And I think that I'ma be okay. Being with you every day. Summer and it's not even May. I think I wanna fly away. My way, I'm so happy I can finally do it my way. Get the key so we can get on the highway. Not to worry cause I know that we'll be okay. Late nights, I'm trying not to be wild. Don't know what I'm feeling but it feels right. Don't know what I'm doing but I'll be alright. I'll be alright, I'll be alright. I'll be alright, I'll be alright.
Our next speaker is here to end us off with a very special talk. Aakanksha is a director at ACT Grants, where she heads their education vertical and is helping build ACT as a platform to catalyze social sector innovations to creating lasting impact. Prior to this, Aakanksha worked at Teach for India, and before transitioning to the education sector, she worked with several corporate giants including BCG, Keefe, and Lehman Brothers. Aakanksha was an FC Austin Scholar at the Tilak School of Management, where she completed an MBA and graduated with a double bachelor degree in mathematics and economics from Duke University. She believes that anyone who is interested in cross-disciplinary and innovative approaches to problem solving ought to consider working in education impact. Thank you for taking the time to be here with us tonight, Aakanksha.
So I want to begin by asking you to first close your eyes and think about the word fitness. And as you think about all the various images and things that you associate with that word, start opening your eyes. Now, for most of us who were born in the early 80s or earlier, the word fitness usually brings up things like exercise and physical activity. In other words, what I usually call physical fitness. However, as the world has evolved, and rightfully so, increasingly, the word fitness also brings up in most people's minds images of things like well-being, mental and emotional health. And so for simplicity today, I will refer to that as mental fitness. And so overall, when I put this together, the good news is that our definition today of fitness is a lot more holistic, it's a lot broader, and at minimum, it usually broadly at least refers to these two buckets of physical fitness and mental fitness. But my push today is that that is not enough. In the coming time, in the world that we need to face now, we actually need a third bucket of fitness, and this is what I will refer to as social fitness. Now, before I move further, I want to pause and draw a quick parallel to something that psychologist Daniel Goleman talks about. He says that in order for us to maximize our full potential, there are three kinds of focus. The first is what he calls inner focus, an understanding of our inner feelings and thoughts. The second is what he calls outer focus. This is a focus on our external surroundings and systems and understanding how they interact with us and our world. And the third is what he calls a focus on other. And this is really an understanding of others' feelings and thoughts and their inner and outer areas of focus. Now, when I bring this together and think about mental and physical fitness, the conclusion I've drawn is often we can tend to work on both of these in privacy, in isolation of the other. And so what it really leaves out is that third focus that Daniel talks about, a concerted focus on the other. And so that's really where social fitness comes in. I believe that we need to make a conscious effort to make sure we're prioritizing that in order to hit all three of these areas of focus that Daniel Goleman mentions. Now, coming back to social fitness, what exactly is social fitness? Is it just a fancier term for socializing? And I know some of you are probably thinking like, come on, is this really that important? Better yet, if you're a friend or a family member of mine, you're probably watching this video in shock. Because for many years, I was actually known for being quite antisocial. In fact, I was a serial phone avoider. I was that person who often tried to avoid phone calls at any or all costs. In fact, when I'd see someone call me, I would literally start hoping that they would hang up or that the call would get disconnected or their phone would die or my phone would die. And they would then have the good wisdom to message me instead. And we would sort out our lives and settle the matter over text or email. The perfectly normal, acceptable, and my preferable way of doing everything in life. Now, over time, some of my bad phone behaviors also started translating into my physical life. I would RSVP to events and then hope that the host would change their mind, or that the event would get cancelled, or that the venue would shut down, or that I would fall sick. I would literally hope that I would fall sick so I wouldn't have to go to events. Because interacting with people and engaging in deep, meaningful conversation and sharing about yourself and learning about them is hard work. And it is time consuming, and it is just easier to not engage in that social interaction. And over time, I would share these stories with others and we would have a good laugh. And often some of them would also open up and admit to doing similar things. And over time, I had started justifying these behaviors. I would say things like, well, I'm an introvert, so I need to engage with the world a little bit differently. And I had convinced people that texting instead of meeting people or emailing instead of engaging in actual events is actually more efficient and financially prudent and more resourceful. And so I share all of this to say, I've been there and I know what you're thinking. And after all of this, I've still come to the conclusion that our social fitness is on the decline and we need to stop it now. We need to ensure that we're prioritizing it. And there are several things that have led to this decline in our social fitness over the last few decades. And I'll share about two of them in particular now. The first big reason for decline in our social fitness is technology. While technology has been an incredible enabler for the world in the last few decades, it has fundamentally changed how humans think, work, and interact with each other. The speed of communication has undoubtedly accelerated, and people like me have seen that paradigm shift as we've moved from writing letters, sending FedEx, to email, chat, social networks that now connect us across the world, and high-speed internet that brings even the remotest areas of the world to our fingertips. But the quality of our social interactions have significantly deteriorated. I don't even need to show you data here. We've all seen people at parties looking at their phones versus engaging in meaningful conversations. We've seen families spend less time talking about their day with each other and more time in front of different screens. We've seen people express friendship and love, but also anger and angst behind the comfort of hiding behind screens versus doing it the hard way, face to face. We've seen cyberbullying on the rise because it's so much easier to not have to confront the hurt that you're causing. It's why parents are collecting cell phones at birthday parties, and schools are having to come up with norms around cell phone usage for different ages. In fact, not only has technology led to a detrimental impact on our social fitness, there is clear evidence that technology has actually also led to a decline in our mental fitness. There is study after study that shows that as tech usage goes up, it has almost a perfect correlation with declining mental well-being. The second big reason for our declining social fitness is COVID-19. With the onset of the coronavirus pandemic, technology usage amped up rapidly across the world. Individuals of all ages started spending more time on technology than ever before. And we immediately started seeing the repercussions of this on both mental and social fitness across more age groups and more income groups than ever before. With increasing smartphone penetration and 1 billion people projected to come online in India by 2030, technology's impact on our social, mental, emotional, and psychological well-being is inevitable. Ultimately, we've got to remind ourselves, as Sebastian Junger does in his book, that human beings are social beings. While we all have different personalities and preferences, at our core, we have a strong instinct to belong to groups that have a purpose, mutual relationships, and an understanding. And we don't just want to be associated, we want to belong to these groups that he refers to as tribes. These tribal connections have suffered deeply in modern times, but regaining them, Junger claims, will be key to our survival. We know that as the world began to get more obese, we had to start prioritizing our physical health. And as our awareness of psychological well-being has increased, we've had to make effort to prioritize our mental health. In the same way as our tribes and social behaviors are getting weaker, we now must prioritize building them back. So then what is the plan of action? How are we going to beat this social fitness pandemic? I'm going to share 3 tips with you, but remember that underlying all 3 of these, my advice is to treat social fitness just like you would physical fitness or mental fitness. So the first step to becoming more socially fit is to actually start tracking it, just like you would track your physical fitness or your mental fitness. You would usually at the end of a week or a month ask yourself, how many times did I exercise? How many steps did I take? What is my well-being like? In the same manner, I'm suggesting you also track your social fitness, and the results will really surprise you. When I first started doing this, I was quite taken aback. I could spend a whole week at work or even, during my college days, having gone to meetings, interacted with people at a surface level, done deep thinking, even submitted my work on time and been fairly achievement oriented. But actually in that week, I would have escaped all meaningful, deep social activity. I wouldn't have been vulnerable. I wouldn't have shared my feelings with someone else. I wouldn't have taken the effort to get to know how others were feeling, all of which I'm saying are critical to enabling and building our social fitness. So the first step is start tracking it. The second step is prioritize it, just like you would your mental or physical fitness. Remember that the first step is often the hardest. putting on your sneakers, making it to the gym, signing up for that counseling session is really hard. But remember that once you got through that 60 minutes, how rewarding it felt, how great you felt. It's the same thing with social fitness. You're gonna have a hard time making that first step, but you're gonna do it because remind yourself how good it feels once you actually went to that party and started interacting with people. Remember what it felt like when you had that meeting in person and how much better results it yielded. The truth is, whether it's work or academic achievement or projects in school or college, I could give many examples, but there are certain outcomes that can only be achieved if you put in the time in person, physically, interacting in deeply meaningful ways with people. And again, like I said, there are many examples, but just very quickly, there are certain projects where the outcomes can only be achieved through a solid brainstorming session, and brainstorming just has to happen in person when you put in that meaningful time with people. It just cannot happen over text or on WhatsApp or on email or on Zoom. Similarly, teams are more effective when people know each other and have deep, meaningful relationships with each other. It is so much easier to build relationships when we put in the time to socialize and when we prioritize the other. So like I said, you yourself will also find more and more examples, but really the trick to social fitness, like any other form of fitness, is that you have to prioritize it. You have to set a cadence, you have to put it on your calendar, and you have to get it done, knowing that while the initial steps might be hard, the results at the end of it will be rewarding and worth it. And my third piece of advice is to mix it up. No one likes to run every single day or do the same workout routine every single day. We all like variety. And social fitness also comes in all different shapes, sizes, and forms. You can do one-on-one or a small group or large group. You can socialize in the company of your known friends and family. But you can also go for an occasional blind date or put yourself outside of your comfort zone and meet new people and hang out in different social circles. So exercise all of your social muscles and mix it up. So those are really my 3 big tips. Make sure that social fitness is something that you're tracking, it's something that you're prioritizing, and it's something that you're mixing up. And one pro tip, a very successful way to make sure that you are prioritizing all 3 areas of fitness is think of ideas where you can actually attack all 3 of them in one go. Go for a yoga session in the park with friends. So you're working on your inner self, your physical fitness, but also in the company of your close social circle. And so you're checking all boxes in one go. Last but not least, what are you waiting for? Don't keep sitting in front of this video. Go start working on your social fitness. Go share this video with others. Thank you. Bye.
Great talk. Thank you, Aakanksha. And wow, what wonderful ideas and thoughts shared today on our very own platform, TEDx Woodstock.
A very good evening, everyone. On behalf of TEDx team, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank all our viewers for taking the time out to watch our show tonight. A big thank you to our leadership, our production team, our performers, and our team of interns. And finally, a big thank you to our speakers for believing in the theme, for putting your narrative together, and for sharing your story and ideas. We hope to see you all on campus next year in a physical format. And until then, have a good evening and see you soon.